Alright, so I'm playing again in Lichess. I'm playing with the white pieces, and the time controls is 10 minutes and 2-second increment. So after e4, e5, let's just see what opening we're going to get. So I'm heading towards the 4 knights system in the Scotch opening, unless black deviates at this point. Normally here black goes knight f6, which is a normal developing move, and I'm going to meet that with pawn to d4. This is not the main direction of the opening theory these days, but I have been practicing it lately quite a bit, and it leads to positions that generally are fitting my style, I believe. But of course the results vary from game to game. This is the main line. In order to defend the pawn on e4 with the bishop, I first have to release the tension and take on c6. Black really doesn't have much choice here. He has to take with a pawn. Now I'm defending on e4, and generally black tends to play e5 here at some point. Sorry, d5. It's common to exchange, and assuming black recaptures with a pawn, I'm going to castle. So black is spending a little bit of time here on the first few moves, so he must be recollecting the theory and just trying to remember what he's supposed to play, which is generally a common scenario in this line. You don't get too big an advantage on the clock, but you get a little bit of a saving there. So I'm going for this line with pawn to h3, which became the main line in the last few years due to Kramnik's new ideas in this line. The purpose of h3 is to be able to put the queen on f3, putting some pressure on the knight on f6 potentially. So here I'm going to just put the bishop on f4, which is the idea of this line, that instead of going bishop to g5 here, white instead tries to cover up the b8 square, and potentially the swap of these bishops is beneficial for white. Another idea is that here I'm transferring the knight to f4 in the case of exchanges. Well, in case black exchanges on f4. So this move now is expected because he had defended, he covered the diagonal with the bishop. And now I believe most natural response for me is to put the pawn on b3. Next, we're just going to wait for resolution in the bishop tension. So at some point, either white is going to take on d6 or black is going to capture on f4. I'm generally encouraging the capture on f4 because that would give me a tempo to develop the knight. If that does not pan out, the knight is also potentially ready to hop to d4. So that's not to be ruled out either. So, okay, so he succumbed to the tension, and now it's... So this is a fairly typical position, and we just have to see how that tension is going to get resolved. One idea here I have is just pawn to c4, trying to put pressure on d5. Another one is to maybe put the pressure on the king side with knight to h5, but I don't think that's really working out. I think c4 is my best bet here, and if he exchanges, then the pawn structure is generally to my advantage. Let's see. Just to play it quickly, I'll go with this. he probably can play something like queen to a5. Yeah, and that he does. So now my e1 rook is under attack. So I have an option of playing either. So I have a couple of ideas. I could go rook to d1, I suppose, and give up the e file. That is not out of question. I could also go king to f1, but that would drop my a2 pawn. Finally, I could exchange on e8 and then take on d5. So those are the options here. So far, I'm leaning towards towards playing rook e to d1, because that would keep the tension in a good way, perhaps. At some point, white has to. The downside of playing rook to d1 is that then I would probably allow him to play knight to e4, however good or bad that is. I don't think it's panning out for him though. I think I can just do this. In lines like this, we can appreciate the benefit of having the pawn on h3, because now bishop g4, for example, is ruled out, and that's definitely helpful. In the meantime, while this tension on the e file is resolved by me yielding to him, yeah, so there was pressure on d5. So he decided that he was better off putting the pawn on d4. And from the point of view of pawn structure, it's good to keep the pawns of the color of the squares that are same as the color of the bishop. But from the point of view of piece play, well, it gets a little tricky. I do have a slight shortage of ideas here. One idea I could try is maybe play pawn to a3 and then pawn to b4. But that doesn't seem like that would work well. Another thing I could try is force him to commit to the pawn structure one way or another, and possibly transfer my knight to g3 via e2. Given that I don't really have many other ideas, maybe this is what I should do. Another idea is to play bishop c2 and put the pressure on him that way, because that would also attack the pawn on d4. The upside of bishop to c2 is also that he would then, the bishop from there would defend the pawn on b3 in case I want to play a3 and b4. So after much deliberation, I'll go for this. Maybe I overlooked something in a major way. So I think he has to play pawn to c5, if that's, assuming that was his intended plan. And I don't really have a terribly good follow-up to that, other than maybe playing knight to h5 and trying to play around the weak dark squares on his king side. If he plays c5, the downside of that is that he would shut off somewhat his queen from the king side, and that might give me a little bit of a room for some play, but that would only be a move or two. Okay, So for that reason, I suspect he did this, where he refused to cut off the queen from the king's side. Would this here also increase the pressure on, well, he increased control over the e4 square, and now he might be ready to put the knight on e4 when the time is right. The word crisis of ideas comes to mind here. A3 and b4 might be an idea, but as soon as I play a3, he goes pawn to c5, and I'm out of play there. I need to come up with something quick, while not also... I think I have no choice but to play some waiting move like rook here. Potentially this is doubling on the d file, but that is also potentially quite useless because the pawn is going to d5 anyway. On the upside, this is preparing rook to e2, so that might be of benefit here, but it feels like... But this would only be of benefit if I then doubled with the other rook to the e file. That's still somewhat promising. It's not very clear if he can play knight e4, and that's dangerous because of rook to e2. I have a feeling because the position hasn't really resolved and we're both starting to get low on time, I have a feeling that time trouble will decide this game. So it is important to have some idea of what to do here for the next few moves. I have two plans, I guess. A3, B4, and rook A1 to D1. They're both likely to be disturbed by pawn to C5. And all in all, whoa. Wow. So I just blundered that. That seems like it's a game over. I really don't have a good reply to that. So rook d2 was a giant blunder. Can I save my material here in any way at all? Not likely. I really cannot move the bishop while also saving the rook. I have only one possible idea: to take I don't have any idea. To take with the queen and then to try to play for some ideas with knight to h5, but that's just so unlikely, and he always has queen e5 at the end of that line there. It's just game over in a really bad way. The worst thing is that it hangs with check, so that's just not something to ignore. This is embarrassing because I definitely violated the key rule of not having hanging pieces. It's just that nothing really is ever working out, because after he takes with check, he then also has all kinds of good moves, and I just don't have a single idea here. And if I take with the queen, he can also just take on f4, so this is a giant flawed situation. I think I have to resign. Okay, that was devastating. No, I don't think I want a rematch. It was well played by Black, though.